Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
What's behind Pierre Poilievre's popularity? The man who would be Canada's next prime minister, known for his catchy slogans.
It's time for a common sense conservative government that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
He's the man to watch in Ottawa these days. How is he doing it? What are the keys to the conservative leader's success in the polls? What is in the formula that has nearly half of Canadians telling pollsters they would vote for the Conservatives if there was an election today? Pierre Poilievre seems poised to win a potentially record-setting massive majority government in 2025, and yet he remains a polarizing figure in Canadian politics. According to the latest data from the Angus Reid Institute, 55% of Canadians say they don't like Pierre Poilievre, compared to just 38% who say they do. Nonetheless, the Conservative Party has more than double the support of either the Liberals or the NDP. Is it the man or the message? I'm David Smith. This is The Big Story. I'm joined today by Chris Day. Chris is the president of the public affairs firm Winston Wilmont. He is an expert in corporate and political communications. Chris worked as a director of communications and as chief of staff in multiple cabinet portfolios under the Harper government, and before that as a journalist covering Parliament Hill. Chris is here today to help us understand why Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party of Canada has been so successful at gathering public support since Poilievre took the helm in 2022. So Chris, if we can start at the top, and we'll flesh this out as we go along. What would you say is the key to the Poilievre PR machine? What is it about the Conservative Party's messaging that is resonating so strongly with Canadians?
Well, Pierre himself is a rare political animal in that he is better unscripted than scripted, I would argue. He is perhaps generationally good at being really pithy with his word choices, not wasting any words, looking for action-oriented, active language. He has an amazing command of facts and figures. He brings in stories that connect with his audience, and he's able to wrap it all around in these sort of branded messages that are build upon one another. It's sort of the wash, rinse, repeat effect of communications, right? You say it over and over and over again, and people start to actually hear it. And so he is really, really good himself at doing that. And the party has oriented itself around those messages that I was talking about, because they're the ones that are really connecting with Canadians' lived experiences right now. The last few years have been really very difficult for people on a whole bunch of fronts. And that's not just in Canada, it's around the world. Incumbent governments everywhere are dealing with this. But what the Conservative Party under Pierre have been able to do is really tap into that in a way to say, we hear you, in a way that those guys who've been in power for almost a decade do not. And that's, I think, the main key to their success right now.
Can you talk a little bit about what they call message discipline for us? Why is that so important? From my perspective, and I know this sentiment is shared by members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery, anyone who's had the opportunity to ask Pierre Poilievre a question or interview him, he is very good, and it is frustrating as an interviewer, at answering any question you put to him with his key messaging. He stays on the point and he hammers those key messages regardless really of what you're trying to get out of him. Why is that so important for a political leader to be able to command his message with such discipline?
So there are two reasons for message discipline, and especially in the modern context. First off, for as long as I've heard this stat, this goes back 30 years, The average person needs to hear something 7 times before they actually start to retain it. So they need to hear something over and over and over again before they actually, it starts to stick in their minds. And so that's one thing. The repetition is really important in terms of getting to popular sort of recall. That's huge. The other thing that people often forget is that we have this minuscule attention span as people right now. Microsoft, I think in 2015, pegged the average adult attention span at about 6 seconds, which is less than our friend the goldfish at 8 seconds, by the way. So in the world of communications that we live in right now, political communications need to be on brand, on message, constantly across channels, and they need to be mutually reinforcing and integrate. So it needs to be saying the same things over and over and over again so that people know what we're all about and it actually sticks. That's the challenge. Repeating it and then, getting sidetracked. Everyone's doing that these days, whether you're in politics or in, product marketing or any other form of communications. It's sort of like squirrel, right? You're off to the next thing before you're done saying what you're saying. Pierre has been especially good at that message discipline, staying on track with just a few very key messages and saying them over and over and over again, and having them frankly resonate and stick to people because they speak to their lived experience.
So the repetition, the slogans, the axe the tax, build the home, stop the crime, fix the budget.
You're saying it, right? Like you're saying it. That's
because it's stuck in my head because I've heard it so many times.
Right. And you are a particularly, clued in political watcher. But, what I've noticed over the last few months is in, overhearing conversations for people who are not sort of political animals, right? In, settings at the local hockey arena or, at my in-laws' place over Christmas or, at the local pub or whatever. I'm starting to hear more of that messaging in regular discourse. And that is where I think you're seeing it play out in the polls, right? There is this sort of popular support building for a message track that Pierre has been weaving for the last couple of years.
Okay, on the other side of the equation, the Liberal Party has been working hard to define Pierre Poilievre in a negative light. They are running attack ads against him. Why do you think the Liberal messaging hasn't moved the needle?
So I would challenge you on that. I don't think they have done a particularly hard job of defining Pierre Poilievre, and I think they're going to pay the price for that. They could have, out of the gate when he was first chosen as the Conservative Party leader, done a much more robust campaign to frame who Pierre is for people and set that narrative for people before Pierre could do it himself. And I think they're playing catch up now. They haven't done the tough work, and frankly, it's expensive work too, to define Pierre in a way that Pierre would not want to be defined. And instead, I think they left him open to run the table and spend millions of dollars on flashy TV ads, with his family and others, to define himself. And so I think they're paying the price for that. And when I was back in government, I remember the party spent, millions of dollars on ads on, defining Michael Ignatieff, right? Not in it for you. He didn't come back for you. And that worked. He hobbled out of the gate. A government that's been in power for almost, at the time, 7-8 years, is already facing winds of change. And if you don't put them in your sail, the winds are going to get you every time.
One thing that fascinates me, Chris, about the Pierre Poilievre effect is that as popular as the Conservative Party is, as popular as that message is, as much as that's connecting with Canadian, Poilievre himself, individually as a leader, is still a polarizing figure. If we take a look at the Angus Reid Institute's data tracking the popularity of federal leaders over time. In the months leading up to the 2015 election, Justin Trudeau's personal approval rating went from 48% to a peak of 65%. At one point, nearly 2/3 of Canadians supported Trudeau personally. Contrast that with Pierre Poilievre today. His personal approval rating is just 38%, and 55% of people polled say they don't like the guy. They have a negative impression of him. So what can those numbers tell us? Is it the man or is it the message?
Well, I'd add a third M to that. I think there's also, man, message, and moment.
Okay.
And we have a moment here where, you have a historically unpopular government, historically unpopular prime minister, that is really long, both are long in the tooth, on their way out, tired. They're making rookie mistakes 9 years in at critical moments. And so that is a moment that Pierre and the Conservatives are trying to capitalize on. And frankly, every opposition party is trying to capitalize on right now. I think that Pierre has got a moment in front of him that he's looking to seize. And I think that moment involves less of an opportunity for people to say, who do I want to have a beer with, right? Because that used to be the test. Which leader would I want to have a beer with? Versus who would I leave my kids with? Or who could I trust to stand up to Donald Trump? Or what other questions am I asking? Who's going to change my ability to get into a house I can afford, right? These are different questions than who do I want to have a beer with? Justin Trudeau may be the guy at the party that you want to hang out with all night, but do you want to be left with Justin Trudeau's hangover? That, I think, is where Pierre is coming in and finding his moment.
Okay. The beer test for a politician. Would you like to have a beer with this leader? Is maybe more useful in good times than in bad, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, when you look at the sort of net popularity figures, right, like Pierre's leading a very, very popular political movement right now. So if he's, +1, +2, then he's still at 50%, right? When you look at, leader versus party figures in other polling, both Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau are major drags on their already languishing parties. So that's a real problem for any political outfit. Frankly, the next most popular leader, I think, is Yves-François Blanchet of the Bloc Québécois. And there, too, where he is running MPs, you're seeing a real sort of openness to people to listen to his message. Even if they don't really know or particularly like the guy, there's a mix there that he's not Justin Trudeau. He's not someone who they think is going to hurt or cost their family money. They're willing to be open to what they're saying, and they give them a chance.
And to put it even more plainly, I think I don't need to like the guy. I just need him to do a good job running the country. Fair enough.
I just need him not to cost me more money
Right.
and make my life more difficult.
So on that front, one of the chief criticisms of Pierre Poilievre that I hear is that he doesn't have any policy ideas of his own. He just attacks the Liberals all the time without putting any solutions of his own forward. He is in opposition, but he does need to convince voters that he is a prime minister in waiting. So what is the political strategy there? And could it become a liability for the Conservatives in an election campaign?
So I would argue that. I think Pierre is doing it in a way that is, very much in keeping with what the job of an opposition leader is. And as you've pointed out, it's to oppose the incumbent government. What Pierre has started to do, and I'm not sure if our listeners will have noted this, but he started to do much more sort of long form video, long form interviews, where he is laying out some very clear policy platforms and positions. And he is using the facts and evidence of the current moment to skewer the government, but also to say, here's what I would do differently. Here's where we need to go. Here's where, if you're following me, we're going to take Canada. And I think that is exactly the right strategy for the time. It is, again, that man message moment. You've got the man, he's got the message that's clearly got some sort of resonance, at least on a basic level, and that's showing up in polling. Now seal the deal, capitalize on the moment, and put out those pieces of policy and promise and a plan that will say to people, tell people, I'm not going to be like the other guy and make these grandiose promises that ultimately lead to, lower than anticipated results that ultimately aren't even ones that are particularly good for you and your family. Here's a plan and a detailed costed plan, which will come out during an eventual campaign. We hope you'll support. And here's where it's rooted in. Here's where the tough choices are going to need to come. And here's where I'm hoping you'll follow me to.
Looking ahead now to the actual campaign, where it is a zero-sum game, you either win the election or you don't win the election. On the downside risk for Poilievre, not unlike Justin Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre as a political leader has his own baggage. He's been an MP since he was in his 20s. As far as we know, he's never done blackface, but that's a pretty low bar. There are countless hours of video going back 20 years of Poilievre speaking in the House of Commons. In the House of Commons, most of what they do all day is speak on the record. There are countless hours of video and audio of him speaking on a myriad of different issues. He did vote against gay marriage more than 20 years ago. He has said he'll allow private members' bills and free votes on legislation impacting access to abortion in Canada. He does have social conservatives in his caucus. He refuses to get special security clearance to read the full report on foreign election interference. Why are these things not sticking to him right now, and could they be exploited as wedge issues in the next election campaign?
I think if they were fatal issues, they would have been exploited already, and that would have been, that video would have been used against him, in the defining piece that I was talking about earlier, and we talked about earlier. I think that what people are fundamentally misunderstanding is that, as someone who has been in office for 20 years, perspectives and your maturity grows over time. And I think Pierre is a prime example of that. He has his young family now, and I think the contrast of Pierre 20 years ago as the brash kid from Calgary, coming into Ottawa, doing his thing. I think that is a completely different Pierre than we have now. It's the Pierre now is much more mature, much more similarly ideologically aligned, but very, very much more attuned to the complexities of a country the size of Canada and the needs and wants of a population as diverse as ours. And he is someone who gets that at a very intricate level. He's also, frankly, I think, said on multiple occasions where his positions are on those issues and others that you've mentioned. And frankly, I think his focus is going to be so taken up with the need to clean things up in Ottawa after 9 years of, the 9 years that we've seen, getting spending under control, trying to make real, advances early in a mandate on those 4 key areas that he keeps talking about, trying to get spending aligned, trying to reset the U.S.-Canada relationship. These are all going to be much, much, much higher priorities than some of the mud that others might sling at him.
Okay. Well, it is going to be a fascinating election campaign to watch whenever it is that it begins. We are, of course, still waiting to find out when exactly the Liberals will choose a new leader, which will then determine more or less when the election is going to be, but it looks like it's going to be sometime in the spring. Chris Day, thank you so much for your time today. I hope we will be able to have you back on the show in the coming months as we continue to follow all of these interesting twists and turns in Canadian politics. Thank you again.
It was a real pleasure. I'm happy to be back anytime.
And again, that is Chris Day, an expert in political communications. He runs the public affairs firm Winston Wilmont, and he was a director of communications and chief of staff in the Harper government. And that was the big story for today. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find the show on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. I'm David Smith. Thank you for listening.